Okay, I think we're going to get started on the second part of today's Global Food Systems Research Communication Symposium. And I am so honored to be able to welcome artist, photo-essayist, and illustrious Kansan Jim Richardson as our keynote speaker. And I know that you are going to really enjoy his talk about the origins of agriculture from his perspective. And I want to encourage all of you to be sure, if you haven't seen it yet, to get down the hall to see Beneath the Prairie Sky, photography by Jim Richardson in the Weefald Gallery here at the museum. We are open until 8 p.m. tonight, so you have time after the talk. The food will probably still be out there, so linger and visit, and for sure go to the galleries. There are two other wonderful shows at the end of the hall: Mini Doka on My Mind, paintings and prints by Roger Shimomura, and Behind the Glass Eye, photographs by Toyo Miyatake, so all very worthwhile. And now, please join me in welcoming Jim Richardson.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much. Thank you, Linda, the Beach Museum, and everyone at Kansas State for having me here today, and especially to be able to talk to people who know a little bit about agriculture. I often talk about agriculture, but I talk to people who don't know anything about agriculture, and so I can say anything I damn well please. But now I have to be careful, because I'm going to say something and you're going to know I'm dead wrong. So I'm going to talk in gross generalities, you know, and try and stay out of trouble. The business that you are involved in, I want to congratulate you all on your presentations, and the arduous business of taking scientific information and making it accessible. It's vastly important, however, of trying to reach beyond your discipline. So I applaud the effort and the hard work that goes into that translation and the reaching out to the wider public, because I've seen it work, and I've known scientists who have been just masters of doing that, and they often are the ones who get the biggest grants. So there's your incentive for doing all this stuff, you know. So I'm going to ask a sort of a rhetorical question and say, what are we doing here? And I don't mean just here this afternoon talking about presentations, grants, science, and all that. I mean, what are we doing here in Kansas? What are we doing here at Kansas State? What are we doing here on the Great Plains? Why are we here instead of someplace else in the world? And by way of introduction, I want to say that going back 10,000 years to the foundations of agriculture was the time when man started figuring out that there was a way of unlocking the stored carbon energy that was in the soil, all those complex carbon molecules down there, and making them accessible as fuel and energy to humans. And in large, gross terms, we can pretty much understand the history of humanity for those last 10,000 years as the ongoing pursuit of carbons locked in soils. And so when we think about what happened here on the Great Plains after the Civil War, particularly, when a huge stretch of really great soil, mollisols, anybody know what mollisols are? Okay, there's at least one person here, mollisols. Mollisols became available. We saw this vast expansion of farmland. When you look at the chart of expansion of farming land around the world over historic times, going back 10,000 years, that period from 1850 on in the American West was a huge leap as humans figured out here was another abundant supply of carbon energy that we could access for our food. So the short answer then is we're here because of the carbon out there in the soil. And much of human history, as I say, can be traced. All those grand migrations are pretty much the story of people coming out of Africa and searching for places, especially since the invention of agriculture, searching for places where they can access that energy. And it has fueled us. It has fueled us mightily. Well, what I would like to do today is to put all that in context. I can't speak at the molecular level, at the policy level, at the research level that you all speak in. But what I can do is give you an overview, having done stories on agriculture for National Geographic for 20 years now, an overview of the worldwide food system and some thoughts about where we came from and why we're here and what it means, and where, by extension, where you fit in to that larger worldwide picture. So, we're going to start someplace you probably don't expect to start when we're talking about agriculture. We're going to begin at the beginning. I think that's always a good place to start things. And we're going to start up here in Orkney off the northeast coast of Scotland. 5,000 years ago, when a new way of thinking was sweeping across the planet, when people were thinking about their world differently, they were out there doing things like this. They were putting up stone circles like the stones of Stennis. This was the earliest stone circle in Great Britain. This is 700 years before Stonehenge. It's probably the first stone circle. They were thinking about the land differently. They were claiming the land. They were settling down. They were building houses. They were no longer going to be hunter-gatherers. They were going to settle down and live in nice houses. I like this house. This is Scarborough. It's 5,000 years old. When it came out of the sand dunes during a storm in the 1850, there were still combs and brushes and things sitting on that dresser shelf that you see there. Very personal things. Not such a bad house, you know. There's beds. There's a hearth in the middle. Shelves. Dresser. There's a little box there you see by the dresser in the floor. That's to keep your seafood fresh inside. So, it wasn't a mean life. I like to joke that I've stayed in worse hotel rooms than this. But it wasn't a mean life. They were changing their way of living, their way of thinking. They were changing their way of thinking about time as well. They were thinking about the past, where they came from. They were thinking about the future, where they would go in the afterlife. They were building tombs for their ancestors to abide in. They were thinking about building them for the ages. This is Maze Howe. This is the chambered tomb there. Very solid stuff. This wasn't transitory. This was built for the ages and built to last, and it has. And then they were doing something else. There's Maze Howe from the air. What you just saw was inside that mound, right in the circle of that round henge. They were bringing livestock. They were bringing cattle. They were bringing sheep. They brought cattle over to these islands in hide-covered boats. Now, you're talking about transporting cattle in trucks. Well, how would you like to transport a cow in a hide-covered boat? I don't think I want to do that very much. They must have swaddled them up calves, swaddled them up, and carried them over. But they were getting into livestock. And sheep, as I mentioned. Here are those standing stones. And Jimmy runs sheep out there. He owns the farm where those standing stones stand. I find it amazing to think you can own something like that. But he says it was on the farm when he bought the farm, so now it's his. I like his dog. I make particular pains in this picture to leave the dog in the picture. He's the hero of this whole thing, And 5,000 years later, those sheep are still out there scratching their itches on those 5,000-year-old stones, as they have been all that time. I find comfort in that longevity, that ongoing process, and all of that happening, okay? And then they were doing this. They were planting crops. Now, curiously, they were planting grains near the tombs. We don't quite understand what the connection was, why the tombs were placed near the fields or why the fields were placed near the tombs, but there's an age-old connection there. They were growing grains They were making out of those carbon molecules in the soil, they were making carbohydrates, right? You know, the fuel of mankind, all the spaghetti that would eventually flow out of Italy starts back 5,000 years ago in these fields, you know. They were growing grains. They were taking on agriculture. Somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 years ago, maybe 11,600 at the earliest, maybe a little bit earlier, but within 5,000 years of the first bits of agriculture, agriculture won. Hunting and gathering was a thing of the past. Agriculture was a thing of the future. Had totally eclipsed the earlier way of life. Why they did that is still a bit of a mystery, because it wasn't an initial gain. The people who took on agriculture actually had a tougher life, worked harder, and ate more poorly. And there are some scientists who say that they didn't fully recover their pre-agriculture stature until 1850. So it was initially, we don't know quite why you would do that. But we do know what happened then. We do know what happened. Jump forward with me 5,000 years until agriculture has taken over the planet, has spawned cities and civilizations in its wake, totally remade the biosphere. From the time when we lived at the serendipity of nature, it is now our designs that are upon the land. We bought the farm. We've taken over. It is our designs that dominate the sculpture of the landscapes. And then there is this. With it, population, vast population. So now here we are, I believe, at 7 billion. And by 2050, we're going to be something like 9.6 billion. And then something pretty remarkable may happen. Demographers think that at that point, 9.6 billion, give or take a million, hey, it's just billions, you know, we're going to reach a point at which human population reaches its maximum and then levels off and then begins to decline. That's the hoped for outcome. So think about that. 10,000 years ago, we begin agriculture. It fuels this huge expansion of human population. And now, within 35 years, within our lifetimes or the lifetimes of our children, we're going to know the maximum population of planet Earth, of humans on planet Earth. That's a pretty monumental bit of history for us to witness. And we're part of that ongoing story. We're part of whether or not we're going to make that goal of feeding 9.6 billion by 2050. Here's the catch. Because of changing diets, we actually have to probably double food production on the planet in 35 years. At least 70%, maybe double. That's a monstrously big thing to do. And if we can do it, we have to ask the question, what kind of planet are we going to have left? How much of it are we going to consume in the doing of that? So, as we go along this afternoon, what I'd like to do is kind of sort of set that stage of thinking of what do we think farming is? What do we think agriculture is? Well, I put forth that if you imagined the perfect farm, it'd look something like this, wouldn't it? You know, up there on St. Mary's Ridge in Wisconsin, on the Coon Creek watershed, you know, all those sculpted fields and clouds and all that kind of stuff, okay? Let me point out that in the 1920s, this was the most eroded farmland in North America. And it's where the new Soil Conservation Service came to start the efforts to save the soil. I know a guy, Arlen Mansky, who remembers as a little boy being out there when the graders and the bulldozers arrived to start putting in those terraces and those terraced fields. And here it is, what, 90 years later, 80 years later, something like this? And we think of it as the picture of fertility. So if we have the power to take over the planet, we also have the power to take care of the planet. And I think that's part of the whole picture. So, but think about this. Agriculture coverage of the planet, 39% of the ice-free land. And you're not going to expand, you're not going to go plant Antarctica, are you? You know, where there's a finite resource out there for us. Grazing, Flint Hills right out south of town here, you know, the Flint Hills. But remember that grazing land takes up 12.9 million square miles of the planet Earth, twice as much as cropland. So it covers a huge amount of the planet. So from that time, out there on those prairies, where it was bison grazing away, we have totally transformed it. And if you want to think, when you hear the word breadbasket, what you mean is, well, to put it bluntly, a destroyed prairie. Because what you do to make a breadbasket is you take out the perennial grasses and you put in annual grasses. Wheat, corn, rice, you know, whatever. That's what you do. That's what we have done. The plow was the great tool that made that possible. It was enshrined in our mythology by Willa Cather and everybody else, but it was also a very transformative instrument. By World War II, we really put it into high gear. After World War II, we really started putting on the petroleum and transforming the planet in a very, very major way. This is where we live. Now, it even joined our culture, our everyday lives, you know. So here's Husker Harvest Day up there in Nebraska, you know, and all those guys standing there. The announcer has just said, you know, here's the new case 8420 or whatever it is. You know, I should know what kind of a combine or red combine is, shouldn't I? And he revs up and they start going down there the corn rows, you know, and all those guys have lust in their hearts. They just know that if they owned that combine, you know, their lives would be better. They would be complete, you know. They wouldn't have to hold their tail between their legs when they talk to their other farmer friends, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's part of our world, you know. We grow huge amounts of grain, pile it out in the streets when we can't get it all in the elevator. The numbers are astounding. Here in the United States, we go 354 million tons. China's second, 218, Brazil. I'll keep mentioning these things once in a while to give you kind of a picture where we fit into the world food supply system here in the United States. It also becomes our culture and just in everyday life. What I want you to do is to look at that picture in detail. I want you to see those two combines coming together out there in Goodland, you know, at the end of the field, you know, and I want you to notice that the guy on top, he chickened out, didn't he? He had a couple of feet there, you know, he could have come a little closer, you know, but so he's going to be buying the beer tonight. It's all part of our everyday life. It has been for all these millennia. What amazed me coming from this background here in Kansas, from that life, and then going out and seeing people cutting oats in Ethiopia with sickles, was to think that they must think it's drudgery. But when I got out of the car to go down to see them, I heard them singing. This was everyday part of their life, part of their culture, part of how they live their lives, just like those two guys in the combines back there in Kansas. Same thing with rice. Wherever we have teamed up to domesticate those grasses and have them serve our purposes, we've developed a culture around it. If you haven't seen it before, he's thrashing out there in the field. He's got kind of a wooden boat down there in the ground, and he's got these two panels up on the side, and he's grabbing that thing and whapping it till he whaps the rice out of the bundle. So now you see here rice world production. China, of course, the biggest. India, the United States isn't even close. But you see why the Asian world is such a powerhouse, powered by rice. And those three grains, by the way, rice, wheat, corn, well over 50%, sometimes you see 70% of the calories come from those three grains. It's a huge driving force. All of it, you know, done by people like this guy out there. Wouldn't you like to be out there plowing a rice field in the water with an oxen? You know, my gosh, what work. I had never envisioned this when I was growing up. So here are some folks out there growing potatoes up there in Peru. And I just want to point something out. They're planting potato crops. That little field there is about 2 acres total, and they were planting 200 varieties of potatoes in that little field, all mixed together, not different rows, all mixed together. Okay? So you think this can't possibly supply much of our food. But the fact of the matter is, small farmers, under 2 hectares, 5 acres roughly, 50% of our food. Large-scale farming, the kind of stuff we know here in Kansas real well, maybe 30% of the world's food. Urban farming, who would have thought that? Something like 7%. Still a major producer of food in the world. All of it on that basic, simple promise, that simple faith, that if you take that seed and instead of eating it, but you plant it in the ground, you're going to be better off than if you consumed it. That you'll be able to feed your family that night, that great driving force that drives us all, that great fear that we won't be able to do it. That's the human fear that is probably the most universal. So I want to point out something here too. I found these young women hauling firewood in Niger, 10 kilometers each way to their village for firewood. 10 kilometers, 7 miles or so? Yeah, I mean a lot of walking, for firewood. We are claiming a huge amount of the world's resource. How much? Well, there's various estimates, but the best estimates range somewhere between 23.8% and 40% of the world's bioproductivity is claimed by humans. One species taking 1/4 to 2/5 of all the planet's bioproduction. It's a stupendous number. And if you then think, what happens by 2050 if we double food production? How much is that number going to rise? And how much are we going to leave for all the rest of the animals on the earth? That's a pretty significant thing. So let's look at the detail of it. Here's a nice little graphic I found. I didn't invent it, but it's pretty darn nice. And it'll take you a little bit to puzzle it out. Each of those blocks represent 1 million tons of mammals. The central dark area is the total weight of all humans. Us. Total weight. The light blocks around it, most of them, you see, there's goats, pigs, cattle. That's the weight of our domesticated livestock that we depend upon. You see right down here, that one block there, all the elephants on the planet. The green ones are all the remaining wild animals in the world. That's how much we dominate the planet. That's how much we and our supply system dominate the planet. We're not just another species. We own the place, and it is it's our farm. So, we got some problems. We got some things to overcome. Here we are still facing dust storms out here in Kansas, 40, 50 years after we thought we were done with them in the Depression. We're growing a lot of corn out there on the Ogallala Aquifer, as you pointed out. When I photographed this, I meant for it to look golden and like wealth, because it is, but we're pumping a lot of it. By the way, this is 20-year-old technology. This isn't the drippage irrigation you were talking about. That water's evaporating really fast at 100 degrees out in the Kansas afternoon or Nebraska afternoon. But it remakes the geometry of the planet. It remakes those systems, remake what the world looks like. And those cattle feedlots you were talking about, the transportation, yes, they dominate huge swatches of southwest Kansas. That whole concentration of corn production from the Ogallala Aquifer combined with feedlots to finish them out and neighboring packing plants is the great factory of southwest Kansas. For all of that control we've been asserting, we still, though, have that gnawing feeling in our stomach, like these ranchers did up in Nebraska when a storm was coming in, that we're not really in control, that all of this can collapse, all of it is dependent upon the weather, all of it's dependent upon the climate. So let's go on and think about those farms again for a little bit. So I want to go over several aspects, key aspects of agriculture: farms, seeds, farmers, those kind of things. So let's start with farms, those picture-perfect farms up there in East Wisconsin. And to give you a perspective of where we in the United States fit into the world of agriculture, okay? 5 acres or of farms, less than 5 acres. East Asia, 79% of them are less than 5 acres. Central America, 63%. You can go on down the numbers there. And then get down to the United States, 4% of our farms are less than 5 acres. You see how radically different our agricultural system in the United States is from the rest of the world. This is a very different world we know out here, and we shouldn't necessarily expect the systems we develop in our kind of system to work universally someplace else. This is more natural. This is more ordinary in the worldwide scheme of things. This is the Jatilui rice terraces in Bali. It's a World Heritage UNESCO site, 785 acres, 748 acres total, and 355 farms. So roughly, what, 2-acre farms? 355 farms in about a square mile, a little bit more than a square mile. Lots of farms packed into that space. And all of them, you know, hand-built. All that Asian rice world that we know so well was pretty much built by guys like this out there with a hoe, you know. So when we think about farms and what a farm looks like, we have very often when we go someplace like Africa or this is Mali, we have to really re-screw our heads to think about what's going on there, because in many places like this family, this group, doesn't actually quite own the land. They have the right to farm it. And there is no particularly someone you can call the farmer. It's the right of that family group of 30 to 50 people to use that land for agriculture. That's a different thing than we're used to. We keep running into that all over. When we did our food story for National Geographic, they put together this very nice graphic. So to think about the worldwide food supply, I'm going to shorthand the meaning of this. If it's green, the crops are grown for human consumption. If it's purple, the crops are not grown for human consumption. They're either grown for fuel or for livestock feed. In other words, not direct human consumption. So what you see is that India is a tremendous producer of food. Actually, Ethiopia and some places in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, very big producers of food. China, of course, as well. Look at the north central plains of the United States. We don't produce very much food. Mostly that's because we grow corn. 40% of the corn roughly goes to ethanol, another 35% to cattle feed. And so the direct production of food in the Great Plains is actually rather small compared to other areas of the world. And that's production of food, not crop production, production of food. So when we did a story on the soil, I wanted to find a place where I could say that the soil was the author of the landscape, and that's the Palouse out in Washington. Tremendous amounts of wheat production out there on those dusty, lost soils, you know. But a gorgeous landscape, a gorgeous agricultural landscape. And there are those all around the world. But to make soil understandable to everyday readers, people in New York City who live on the Upper East Side say, you know, it's a kind of a leap. You got to really work at it, you know. So I wanted them to get down in the soil and to understand it. So one of the things that I came up with doing was not just soil profiles. All the scientists told me I had to take pictures of the soil profiles, and I thought, oh, people are going to be asleep before they turn the page. But what I did come up with, though, was the idea of doing soil pits all around the world and then photographing the farmers with their soils, that connection, connecting the two. So you saw some kind of emotional connection. You could start figuring it out. So this is James Duggan. He's outside of Salina. James died a couple of years ago. It's too bad. But this was virgin prairie out on his farm. And here's Cletus Reed and his grandson Sam in Iowa. Okay, look at that. You don't have to be a scientist to understand they've got rich soil there. They got about 18 inches of really rich soil there. 1860s, 50s, when they started farming there, they had twice as much. They had 36 inches of topsoil. And the remaining topsoil has about 50% of its carbon left. So, you know, you kind of do the math there and you go, we've burned 75% of the carbon in 140 years? Well, that's kind of fast, actually, in these kind of things. And you're going to have to think about that a little bit. Okay, so here's John Eshelman. He's a no-till farmer out in Washington. He doesn't really have very much soil to work on out there. He has to be really actually careful with it. No-till is perfect for that. Pedro Macedo down in Brazil, he farms on some soil called Terra Preta de Indio. It was a soil made by the natives 500 to 1500 years ago. Charles trying to figure out how they did it. Be nice to know, wouldn't it? You get to Syria and you see Farhad Kalawi, and all of a sudden you go, oh, the situation has changed. This is different. You don't have to be a scientist to realize that that's a different thing. Go down the road, Hassoun Hariri says that they farm by the will of Allah. You know, he's planting oats in that rocky soil. You want to plow that stuff? You know, it's amazing. So, and then you get to Mariam Abdoulaye in Niger, and you think, there she is trying to feed her children on soils like that. Think back to Cletus Reed back in Iowa with that rich soil. And there's not a big mystery why he's growing huge amounts of corn and she's barely getting by. It's not rocket science to figure that stuff out. Then we have big soil erosion problems. This is probably the world's most eroded soil. This is in Shanxi province of China. It's remarkable. Those fields used to be connected. See the tops of that field there and those other tops? They used to be connected. That was all one flat plateau out there, you see, before it started eroding all the gullies. I went over to the two guys in the picture there after I took the picture, and I threw my translator there. I said, you got any problems with erosion around here? And I said, no, we don't, no. I guess if it had been going on for 2,000 years, you get used to it. You know, but we've gotten used to a lot of stuff we shouldn't get used to. This is what you have to do out on those hills to try and make trees grow again. It's tough work trying to make that kind of stuff work. And you have horrible examples. The dead cities of Syria. Outside Aleppo, there's 100 Byzantine cities out there, sitting out there with no soil on the surroundings. These places were prosperous. 700, 800 AD, something like that, you know. These were prosperous. There were fig trees growing in abundance, and there are millions all around there, you know. And now the soil is all gone. So they've lost 3 to 4 feet of soil on top of that rock in 1,400 years, 1,300 years. Those cities are not going to come back, right? There's no reason for somebody to come out there and do that. Palmyra, that ISIS has been destroying. Palmyra, Pliny the Elder came there in the 2nd century, I think it was, and he found 2 million fig trees growing around there. And now look at it, you know. What a transformation. So, no wonder this young woman and her children there, they were so glad that the French had been out there planting trees in Niger because their goats would have something to browse on. This is what these folks think of as progress in soil restoration. Remarkable stuff. So, getting people down into the soil was a fun part of this story of trying to help them understand what's down in there. Jerry Glover at the Land Institute, he was my main co-conspirator figuring out how to do this, digging soil pits and doing root washes. Anybody ever done a root wash? You know, probably somebody. Oh, you got to go out and do a root wash sometime, you know. He's washing out the roots so we can see them and compare the roots of the wheat versus the wheat grass next to it. One of them is a perennial and roots go deep. One of them, the annual grass, doesn't. So we were doing things like this, you know, he would grow out a bit of prairie in a drum, a 55-gallon drum, a couple of them welded together, and then pull them out of the ground and split it open and wash out the dirt out of the roots, you know, and now you've got a piece of prairie that you can look at, and see the root structure underneath, We lit it so that it would kind of look like, it belonged in Vogue magazine or something like that, And Jerry, of course, he had that beard, which was perfect, for taking a picture. I look for those things a lot, these little symbiosis within the graphics of the place. So we did a lot of these things, of prairie grasses, showing the depth of these things. But even looking at them this way, you don't quite get it. Audiences don't quite get it when you show it this way. So what I do is I do this. I start out with some Indian grass. And we're going to take a little journey. We're going to go start 4 feet off the ground and go down the length of it. And we're about 3 feet, 2 feet over the surface now, 1 foot up. And right here, we're going to come to the surface of the ground, and we're going to go down into the root ball. And you start looking at that incredible root ball, which is incredibly dense. It's a magnificent living creature, and you keep going down. We're probably 4 feet underground now, maybe. This is probably about 5 feet. Keeps going on down. 6 feet underground, 7 feet, 8 feet, I think now. Because when we get down to the very tip, we're going to be 9 feet underground. Well, I just want to point out that we understand, everybody understands these days, that whales and elephants and porpoises are magnificent creatures. But we ought to think something about those grasses. Now, go right outside of town, Manhattan right here. Go out to the Cons of Prairie. Take a little tour there as the sun is going down. Think about that kind of biomass underground going on for hundreds of miles in any direction. And you get a sense of what a magnificent ecosystem this is out there, and how lucky we are to have it in our backyard. And all the systems that support it. Earthworms and all the other creatures this is one of the things I got to do. I joke that photographers, Bill Allard, he gets to go off to Paris and sit in cafes and drink wine with beautiful women and talk about Hemingway and stuff like that, I chase earthworms around petri dishes for 2 days in a lab in Iowa, I got pretty good at it. It's one of my talents now. I can herd earthworms. They don't like light and they don't like heat, and you can kind of make them move around there, So the same guy scientists had a bunch of soil fungi. And my God, they were beautiful. I'd never seen anything like it. I thought they looked like Hubble Space Telescope pictures of nebula and the like. They're beautiful, beautiful things. Look at the structure of these things, So are there many of them? Yeah. I want to point out something here in just a second. So take a look at what's in the number of species in 1 teaspoon of soil. Yeah. Species of nematodes, 100. Not 100 nematodes, 100 species of nematodes. 1,000 species of protozoa, 25,000 species of fungi, 75,000 species of bacteria. We don't know who they are yet. It's an amazing thing. 7 billion total organisms in 1 teaspoon of soil. That's a monstrous organism going on down in there. Well, we're starting to conquer some of it. We're starting to figure it out, We're getting the GMO system figured out. This is GMO cotton on the left and non-GMO cotton on the right, resistant to the little bugs that are going to eat up the leaves there, already built in. That whole system, of course, has been a little bit controversial, hasn't it? And we're not beyond that yet. As a photographer, I was happy as heck. Kathy can tell you, that when I'm looking around for a way to photograph what GMO stuff does, And I find this scientist up in Canada who's got genetically modified salmon, and he can lay them out on glass compared to non-GMO salmon. I'm a happy photographer. I've got the thing side by side, and you can see the difference. And if you just tell people that, they automatically get it. Well, that business of helping people get it, is one of the fundamental things we do with visuals in these kind of presentations. And then, of course, we're going to be living with the fear of genetically modified foods for quite a while. That's not going to go away. It's going to be part of the landscape. I can tell you, though, if you were to go to Africa and talk to this young woman and she has bananas that aren't going to succumb to disease, she's pretty happy. If they're GMO, she doesn't really care. You know, that's bottom line on a lot of that stuff. Going on with the systems of what we depend upon are the seeds. The seeds are the code carriers of all these plants. We've been domesticating plants for 10,000 years. The seeds carry that code. So why am I up here in the Arctic with Kerry Fowler? Because he is the developer of the global seed bank that's put into a mountainside there in Svalbard so that the seed banks of the world can have a place to store a backup copy of their seeds. They're stored down there. Even if the power goes off and the cooling plant stops, those seeds will stay viable for several years, if not longer. And should we have the Holocaust, should we have nuclear Armageddon, we have a chance. Those seeds would still be there and existing. There he is carrying seeds into that frozen block of rock up there in the Arctic. There's boxes from all over the world being sent up there. They've got something, I think it's 800,000 species stored there now in that system. Every once in a while somebody needs to go get some. They did that in Syria recently because they lost a seed bank to rioters, I believe. What's in there? Beautiful stuff, amazing stuff. The seeds of our world are astounding things. The mechanisms of how they work deserve our admiration. What have we got there? The riches of 10,000 years of domestication, growing foods for humans in a partnership that we can't live without. Those seeds, but keeping it going is an amazing task. Those seed banks, this is up in Iowa, it's the USDA seed bank, stores corn. You go down those aisles, bottles and bottles and bottles of corn seeds, you know. But you can't just leave it in the bottles forever. You got to grow it out. It's not going to stay viable. And so you're going to have to grow the stuff out, test it, put it back in the bottles, do it again in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. The process is astounding. If it's sunflowers, you can't just go out and plant them on the prairie because the bees will cross-pollinate between the species. So you're going to have a different cage for each species of sunflower, and you're going to have a beekeeper to haul bees around to each and every one of them. Now multiply that by all the plants that we have, domesticated plants we have to keep going in those seed banks around the world, and you get some picture of it. That partnership, I want to take a moment here to talk to you about that partnership. We domesticated plants, right? Well, let's go the other way, and let's suppose that there was a different conversation 10,000 years. Let's say the genes of certain plants, certain grasses, came to man and they said, have we got a deal for you? Okay? If you'll take care of us, we'll feed you in your billions. If you'll nurture us, make the ground safe for us, spread us across the planet, we'll feed you forever. But you got to do something for us. You got to kill our enemies, the other grasses and the other weeds that we don't like. You got to clear out the trees. We don't like trees. And if you do that for us, though, we will feed you and your posterity forever. That partnership is what we've been doing all this time. Their genes and our genes going back and forth. Those Russian immigrants who came from Germany to Russia to grow wheat and then came to America to grow wheat on the plains of Kansas, their genes have been locked in that communication with the genes of wheat, just like all those other people around the world doing the same kind of thing. Wheat production worldwide, China by far the largest grower, 122 million tons. United States, the third largest grower. I grew up out here on the plains thinking we were it, and I was quite surprised to find those numbers and find out something else. So why do we need all those species and all those seed banks around the world? Well, because every once in a while this is going to happen. That red stuff on that stalk of wheat there, UG99 wheat stem rust. And it's very destructive to a wheat crop, maybe 80% destructive. And it started in Uganda, UG, in 1999, and it's spreading. And if it were to get to India and destroy 80% of the wheat crop, disaster. Can things like that happen? Yeah, there was a wheat disease that locked out 2/3 of the Brazilian wheat crop not 10 years ago. Yeah, these things happen. When that happens, you need those 200,000 accessions of wheat, many of which are sitting up here on the K-State campus, and you start sending them over to Ethiopia where they start growing them out and seeing if they can find an accession of wheat that's resistant to the disease. And if you can, then you start breeding it into all the other wheat crops around the world. So it's amazing to see that. It's amazing to see that system where as many of those crops came from. It's why we keep these wild ancestors of many of our crops. These are the wild ancestors of tomatoes. It's amazing for me, a photographer, when I find out that Seed Savers is going to have Tomato Day. And I can find 47 varieties of tomatoes laying out on tables as people go by and sample them. To figure out, well, you can't just keep apple seeds. They don't come out true, You have to keep apples alive in tissue culture like this if you want to store them in a lab. Cattle, you just can't, there's no seeds for cattle. You have to keep the cattle alive. The people in the rare breeds business, they say you have to eat them to save them. If they're not useful, nobody's going to keep those breeds alive. So you have to be useful. I took this picture at the Welsh Fair because I thought they all look like they're in partnership. They're just a club. The cattles and the guys, they've been doing this for a long time, and they all have fun when they go to the show. The cattle like showing off, I tell you they do, And so here's what you have. These guys looking very much in detail at the back of a horse or the width of the hooves of cattle, just like you guys were doing, with all that stuff you're trying to figure out there. This is what generation after generation of farmer has been doing with very sharp eyes, trying to figure out how to make a cow a little bit better, how to make a sheep that will run on the hills and be a little more productive. This has been going on for thousands of years, passing on that knowledge generation to generation, and we've become pretty alike, haven't we? I like the way they bend their knees, just like we bend our knees, those kind of little signals that we're all in it together. The horses standing around and having a drink while the guys gossip after a day of branding out there in the sandhills, of the kid holding his goat there before breakfast when they were getting ready to go to school, I want you to look, by the way, see on the wall back there, that window, that metal window, you see what's on there? They're doing their homework they're doing their math lesson on the side of the house. So we're dependent upon them. We need them. We have to save them. This particular breed of cattle, when they discovered them, there were only 2,400 left, but they're resistant to a disease carried by tsetse flies. That's a good thing to know, good thing to have. That passing on of knowledge I discussed. Here's a little girl walking home with her mother. They've been out harvesting sorghum for dinner. That little girl's 3 or 4? She's already got the system down, doesn't she? This knowledge is being passed on little by little. So the final key to all this is farmers. Farmers who carry the knowledge, make use of it, know what to do with it. People like Scott Dowling. Scott Dowling may be the biggest wheat farmer in North America. He has 50,000 acres in one contiguous field. That's a lot. Yeah, not spread out over a bunch of counties, all one field. In 2011, he grew 1.3 million bushels of wheat. And in 2012, he lost 24,600 acres to drought. So it's an up and down business. It's real up and down business. If you had to say, what does the future of farming look like? What does major food production look like? You'd say, this guy probably, right? I want to show you something here. Here are a bunch of farmers there in Bangladesh, they're out harvesting rice. Now, you're going to be surprised when I tell you that these folks grow more food per acre than Scott Dowling does growing wheat in South Dakota. How can that be? Well, because I loaded the question, actually. Because they have a lot of water. They grow 2 to 3 crops of rice a year. They put fish in the rice paddies when they're not being used. They put tomatoes on every little verge. They got a lot of people. They got a lot of labor. They got pretty good soils. You know, they can do that when you have that kind of intense agriculture going on. But it's quite surprising to us. Those people who grow our food, who carry on that knowledge, you know, it's amazing. Juana was great, you know, up there harvesting potatoes, 14,000 feet up in the Andes, and she could take and put a 70-kilo bag of potatoes on her back and haul it down the mountainside. 140 pounds, a little more, is it? Yeah, you know. By the way, a potato sack is 70 kilos because that's what not an alpaca, but can carry. There's natural systems why all these are they are, you know. But they're basically doing the same thing, the same faith we've been doing for 10,000 years, planting the seeds in the ground on the faith that we'll be better off and grow the food that we need. The farmers everywhere are very inventive, very practical, very innovative. These folks are growing prawns in a little pond next to the house and harvesting them communally every once in a while, going out there. This guy's growing teff in Ethiopia, a grain we hardly know here in the United States, but very essential there. So these are the people. These are the people, if we're going to feed all these people by 2050, these are the people we're going to depend upon, the George Naylors of the world, Basama Kamara growing sorghum there in Mali, or Alexandra Salo growing cabbages in Ukraine. As a photographer, I can tell you that once you find Alexandra, your job is done. Yeah? You don't have to be a good photographer. You just point the camera over there, and when Alexandra smiles, you push the button, you know, and then bam, there it is, you know. Wheat harvest, winnowing in Ethiopia, all these things are growing tremendous amounts of the world's food. Mariam Keita passing on the knowledge of farming to her child who hardly realizes she's learning anything at the moment. So if we have to look, if we have to think about how we will feed the world in 35 years, double that food production, do all this, you know, I want to just point out one thing. Yes, we'll need the Scott Dowlings. We'll need that. But we're going to need a whole lot more. We're going to need all the rest of those people. It's going to be a worldwide system that makes it happen. We really need all of that knowledge, all of that particular knowledge about particular places, all of the innovation, all of the hard work. And if we're going to support anybody to make this happen, we need to support all of them with all kinds of information, all kinds of help, and all kinds of faith that we're all in this together. So thank you very much. Thanks for letting me share that all with you, and I hope you enjoyed it. There you go. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a technical question. I was very curious.
A technical question?
Yeah, curious.
Is it cameras or agriculture?
Lighting.
Lighting, okay.
The earthworms and the fungi.
Yeah, earthworms.
How did you make them?
And
like
the fungi?
Like the body was like.
The earthworms are in a petri dish, and I have a light underneath them, and I have just a little skimming of soil, just enough that you can't see them. But so that the earthworms were, the bottoms of the earthworms were actually on the bottom, on the petri, so that light could come through them, and then I'd add a little bit of light on the top side, and yeah, you could get these things, you know. And it was kind of a hard deal because sometimes it just looked like a bunch of guts, you know. It looked awful, you know. But if it was just the right kind of combination, I could make something that had that sort of glowing quality. The fungi was pretty much the same kind of setup. Light from beneath combined with light skimming across the very surface of it. And very often you can photograph things like coins. Sometimes we use flashlights. And if you're going to do that, you have a coin you want to photograph. And what you do is you take a flashlight, a small flashlight, better if it's just one LED with a little lens or something like this, a real small flashlight. You lay it down here and you put the light right across the surface of it, camera pointing down like this, and all of a sudden you have some old Roman coin, and all of a sudden Caesar's just pops right out there, you really, because you got the shadows and all the texture showing up. So very often what you'll see there, and that's what you saw on the fungi, was light coming across the surface, a little bit to highlight here, a little bit to highlight there, and then light coming through the bottom of it. Yeah, I need to go back and do more of those. Nobody's really photographed the fungi like that. So,
I mean, it had this very beautiful colors, like pink and very like purple.
You mean the fungi?
The fungi, and
That's
is that
them.
from the lighting? Like they're reacting to the
That's
lighting?
them.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, they are. They can be amazing. They can just be stunning things. Yeah. So that's why I'd like to get back. And the numbers, the way they do that is they'll take and let's see if I remember this. They will take a sample from the soil and they'll culture out the fungi, all right, and then they'll take and they'll cut the dilution like 1 in 10. Am I getting this right? And then another 1 in 10 and 1 in 10. So all of a sudden, so what you saw there was like 1 in 100,000 dilution or some astounding number. And you do that enough, you see, then you can say, okay, in 4 square inches, X number grew. Now you multiply that back to the number of times you cut it, and you get, oh, I see how many there were in there. Yeah, we got it now. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Linda.
Yeah, there are many people in this room who probably who do know more about this than me, so I may be wrong. But I feel like we live in a place and a time when a lot of the research at a university like ours gets funded by corporate entities, farming, agribusinesses of different sorts. What is happening or what can happen to educate agriculturally focused students to have a larger perspective than that? Because I feel like that's the perspective you just presented.
The first thing you do is you send me all around the world to give this lecture many, many times.
And are there places that you're aware of where that's being done very well?
But yes, I think that's very, very important. I don't know the exact answer to the question, except to say hugely important. What I think is also important, and that I wanted to say earlier too, is that whole story that I started out with 10,000 years ago, is playing out right here. We're not on the periphery of world events. We're at the center, if not the epicenter, of what's happening. And if I just think that it's probably important that if you can't sort of look at all the component parts around you and see where it all fits in, then it probably would behoove you to look around a little bit more and see how all these bits and pieces and parts are really gears of a larger mechanism. All the things you presented here today, yeah, exactly. It's all part of a larger puzzle. And I think here in Kansas in particular, we have been remiss in feeling that agriculture and our place in the world was somehow a lesser light in the luminaries of what's going on, and we need to stop that. We need to understand who we are and why we're here. So if you have an answer for doing that, answering your question, I think it's a hugely important question, and I hope it will happen. So I'm doing a story right now on origins of agriculture, and it's only recently been really recognized that the Northeast United States was one of the centers of origin of agriculture. So we'll probably try and incorporate some of that. It's important to know that. And just in case, there were 8 or 9 centers of origin in the world of agriculture independently. It wasn't one center starting out in the Middle East and then it all spread across the planet. It happened independently in numerous places around the world. And why it all happened in essential synchronization over such a relatively short period of time is one of the foundational scientific questions of our archaeological age. So, anything else? Yeah.
I wonder if you have a philosophical or even technical commentary on kind of a strange question, but on
I like strange questions, yes.
going to, to basically starting over, going to Mars, we max out our
Yeah.
resources here.
Yeah.
We go figure out a way to make another planet work for us. What's your commentary on that?
I think if you had to do that, you'd be much better staying here and making this work. Frankly, oh yeah, I mean, that's real work trying to make something like this, and we already have such an obviously abundant place here. One of the unfortunate things is that we have to be careful about growing more food. Because we did that. We've done it several times. We did it in the Green Revolution of the 60s and 70s. And what we had 3 billion people and 1 billion hungry people out of that. And we had this great green revolution of improving agricultural production. We did not get 3 billion people who were well fed. We got 7 billion people, and 1 billion people are still hungry. So we have to be careful about how we do it, or you can simply get a larger population instead of actually conquering human nutrition. That's happened in any number of times, and that's one of the things that happened way back 7,000 to 8,000 years ago when agriculture came in, is instead of getting just simply a better quality of life, you simply got more people. And with more people equal more votes, basically, So we have to be careful how we do it, and it isn't just a simple problem of just simply growing more food. Yes, sir. I did a food safety story,
Oh, that's great. I'd love to see it. So 2 questions. One, what made you get into this line of work?
Yeah.
Why did you become a photographer? And then do you have one photo that's your favorite that you'd hang up over your mantle at home?
That's a harder one, yeah. But I'll start with the easy one first. That's how did I get in this level of this work? Well, I was a senior at Kansas State, and I was majoring in psychology. And I finally figured out what a psychologist would do every day. And so then I went and got a job at the Collegian as a photographer, and that stuck. I went through a lot of majors, actually, and I can't even remember, electrical engineering and all the rest of this stuff. But photography stuck, and I don't know quite why it stuck, except to say that it was an avenue, as it turned out, for me to explore the world. And not actually have to be responsible for knowing anything. That's one nice, easy way of saying that. But it has been extremely rich because every one of these stories that I do is a huge research project, and I just love that stuff. So, learning about food safety, yeah, that was a deep one to get into, but it was fascinating. And all the rest, yeah, it's just always been great. I've got a stack of books this high of origins of agriculture that I'm wading through and trying to figure that out. So it's been hugely rewarding. Single picture, I don't know, Kathy, do I have a single picture? I don't think I do, actually, do I? A single picture they're also good, How do you pick? I don't know. No. But there might be there was a picture of Mrs. Shintaffer.
Jim. I think the 2 that I like are...
The 2 you like?
The 2, yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah. Which are they?
My favorites are the man who's hiding his...
Oh, hiding is, yeah, the one outside in the exhibit. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then there's a woman who's behind a cut glass.
Oh, with her hand up, Mrs. Krasny.
The 2 of those together are Kansas.
Well,
The Kansas psyche.
if Kathy likes them, I like them.
And that's the right attitude.
The picture that's also in the show of Mr. Fraser, the water witcher, that was kind of a transitional picture because it was the first picture which I really understood that I could take something and not just make a representational reportage of it, but make a picture that it was more a statement. And that's not always easy to do, and I still don't, you don't always succeed. But there was something about that, and I could actually see when I was looking through the viewfinder, I thought, oh, this is working pretty good. That this was something that it was a grander statement than simply saying what Mr. Fraser looked like, So maybe that one, yeah. But don't let that dissuade you from buying all the rest. So okay. Well, all right. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, Linda. Thank you for everyone at Kansas State. Thank you.